So, Tom, I want to circle back to something we talked about yesterday. We had David Birnbaum on the air talking about this idea of those 3 English courses, or 3 French courses, rather, part of that makeup now for CEGEP. I got a note from Robert Libman asking me about something you had said, which was that when we pointed out that David Birnbaum and Hélène David seem to have acted on their own, because they're the ones who brought this up, you suggested it had been done without Dominic Anglade's knowledge, and he's suggesting that that's possibly not the case. She must have known. So what can you fill in as far as the blanks on that goes?
Well, I would have loved to have had the chance to talk to my Gazette colleague, Mr. Libman, instead of through you. But that being said, I don't see what he'd be basing himself on to say that she must have known. Like, what she got as information. The information that I got at the highest level of the Liberal Party of Quebec was that Dominic Anglade and the party had talked about this idea as long as there was no notwithstanding clause and as long as there were no restrictions to access to English CEGEP. The idea that they would vote for this with Dominic Anglade having laid down those 2 conditions was put to the test the next day when she was at Dawson, and she repeated the same thing. So I think it's pretty darn clear that Dominic Anglade had her conditions here, and it wasn't what was met. But there is a bit of a silver lining for David Birnbaum, even though he voted for this terrible idea, because today he's the one who got to put out a video on his Facebook page in which he announced, rather than anybody else, he announced that the Liberals will be voting against Bill 96, which is super interesting in the context of, we all know that there's going to be a political party announced in the next 4 to 6 weeks. You know, some of the old-timers like Keith Henderson are going to be part of this. I don't think it's going to go anywhere, to be quite honest with you, but they're going to make an attempt to try to say the Liberals have sold out. They're not there for us. So for Birnbaum to be given the chance to make a video and to say, we're voting against Bill 96 is great. And when you know Dominic Anglade's personal story, you know, her parents both fought against the dictatorship of the Duvaliers. Her father was put in jail by the Duvalier regime. She's somebody who's fought for rights her whole life. So to be told by a bunch of angry people who have been saying the same thing for decades that she's against rights, but they're going to be the ones fighting for rights, it's a bit galling. I think that Dominic Anglade is going to come out of this looking pretty good. If David Birnbaum's announcement turns out to be the case, then I think that the Liberals are showing the strength that they have, the courage, the conviction, and I think that Anglade's going to come out of it very well.
Is there something unusual, though, in the fact that he released this and the leader of the party did not?
Yeah.
Well, you can be sure that he wouldn't have released it. In this case, you can be sure he wouldn't have gone online and released this thing unless he had it cleared. So he was maybe being given a chance to redeem himself.
Okay.
Because people like you and I had been going pretty hard. I had spoken to him. You had spoken to him any number of times. I couldn't understand what got into him to vote for this thing. Let's explain it to the listeners one more time. This would have said that every English kid coming out of a St. Thomas High School in the West Island going to John Abbott would have been told, oh, by the way, you got the best marks in your class. Do you think you're heading for dental school or medical school? This just in, you're going to do your calculus in French, you're going to do your physics in French, and you're going to do one of your chemistries in French. And the kid's going to have marks that are lower because that's of that additional burden. It's not that they don't speak French, they all do. It's not that they're not going to pick it up at work. They would, but it was an absolutely unnecessary, uncalled for, and frankly not thought through burden that would have been imposed. So given the fact that Birnbaum voted for it, couldn't explain it, now he's been given a chance to explain that the Liberals are definitely voting against Bill 96. I think that that's a big high five all around.
Okay.
I feel like, what a mess. I feel like this was meant to be some sort of bargaining tool, like, hey, we'll give you this if you give us that. But it's all blown up. How much damage do you think this has actually done?
Well, I mean, the people who have been pushing this narrative against the Liberals and against Anglade are the people who are trying to set up their own political party. And, if you know the history of the people who are behind this, they're people who have been saying essentially the same thing for decades in most cases. And I was talking to somebody who was involved, and I said, well, how diverse is your group? Well, answer, not really. I said, so okay, so a lot of women involved? No. So, I mean, it's the same crew. So let them push away as much as they want against Anglade and the Liberals. Dominic Anglade has no lessons to receive from anybody with regard to fighting for human rights. She's lived this all of her life.
All right. Look, I was going to ask the question. Maybe this is inappropriate, Tom. Were you approached about joining this party, perhaps?
Somehow they forgot to ask me. No, the answer is no.
Okay.
And I would, no.
interesting.
No, I've spent my life working hard on complex issues, and that precludes simple, the type of facile answers that these people are planning to pitch out there. They have no chance of winning anything resembling a seat anywhere, and they only would run a couple of people in the Montreal area. They're trying to make a point, and we'll see if it upsets the apple cart. I mean, their very existence, paradoxically, might actually help the Liberals, because looking at the wider majority population, they could say, hey, you can't please everybody. There are people running against us because we're not enough in favor of the Anglos.
Okay.
I mean, fair enough, but given what a huge asset you would have been to them, I'm nonetheless surprised you weren't asked. Let's talk about this Canadian Indigenous delegation.
Yeah, hold on. You know what? Yeah, let's do that. I want you to hear the clip, though, because we have a clip here of Phil Fontaine. He's the former chief of the Assembly of Nations, First Nations. Here's what he said on the meeting with the Pope.
I was asked about my impressions or feelings about the meeting. He gave me a real sense of optimism. We're on the verge of finally turning the corner on this issue that befuddles so many. The Holy Father say to us very clearly, the Church is with you. That's an incredibly important statement, because the next thing we will hear is, I am sorry. I'm absolutely convinced of that. I'm also convinced that this very important moment in the lives of our people will take place on Canadian soil.
So there you go. That's from earlier today. Natasha?
I really hope he's right. I really hope an apology will be forthcoming. Do you think that's really going to happen, Tom? Is that where we're at? Is it wrong to hope?
I cannot see how His Holiness can not apologize after this series of meetings. That was, by the way, an incredibly long press conference. I got to see the part that we just played was one of the parts I was able to watch and continue watching. And I was marked exactly as you were by what Phil Fontaine said, because he's essentially making a prediction that becomes an obligation. In other words, the prediction is an evaluation of the meeting they've just had. So if it turns out to be another broken promise, then that'll be much worse for the Catholic Church. And I think that there are simple things that could have been done. There was a deal reached with the Catholic Church and the First Nations, a deal that was not respected at all by the Catholic Church. A lot of the money never appeared, and what little money did appear seemed to disappear down a rabbit hole in legal fees. So almost nothing flowed to those First Nations, even though it's a pittance compared to the $40 billion that was recently put on the table by Mr. Trudeau and the federal government. It is a very important matter on principle. That money could have made a difference, because we're still talking tens of millions of dollars. Yeah. So I think that the Catholic Church has no choice whatsoever here but to admit the wrong that was done. The other churches, the other major churches have all apologized. The only outlier right now is the Catholic Church. And this visit to Rome, I think, conditions things. And the Pope, as Fontaine says, let him take it away, let him reflect on it and pray on it, and come back and do the right thing and apologize.
And maybe do it in Canada, which would be extra marks, I would guess, right?
Yeah, it really would.
Okay. Let me talk real quick about, we mentioned the environmental plan Stephen Guilbeault produced the other day. Now, of course, the Trudeau government getting ready to hike the federal carbon tax. This is supposed to happen tomorrow, another $10 per ton. So I loved your line, which says, the candidates for the Conservatives may not agree on a lot of things, but they do agree on one. This is the wrong move. But what are the options here? So if you don't agree on this, where's your option?
Oh, you have to put a price on carbon, and you have to keep increasing it if you want to lower our carbon footprint and the amount of greenhouse gases that Canadians put into the atmosphere. There were a lot of other things that we could do, but, I mean, this is the backdoor way of discouraging people from buying Ford F-150s as their family car when they absolutely don't need a massive pickup truck with a huge engine. And so this is a way of saying, well, if you really want your fill-up to be $200, keep buying these big trucks. But if you want it to be a little bit normal, try to buy a small four-cylinder car that'll do all the work that you actually have to do. If you're buying it for your workplace, that's something else. But, go to the parking lot of the Costco in St. Jerome with your car, and you're going to really stand out, because you're going to be the only one who doesn't have a pickup truck. I think that Canada is going to be put to a test, though, because, by the way, Guilbeault's plan from a couple of days ago, top-notch, lots of detail, lots of money, lots of really good ideas. And now we're going to have a budget next Thursday, and we're going to see what happens just a few days after that budget, because they've got 15 days left to decide this big offshore project called Bay du Nord. It has a very funny half-English, half-French name. If they approve that, you see, Guilbeault was able to buy himself a pass. When he signed on with Trudeau, he got beaten up by some environmentalists, but he said, look, he bought his pipeline, he did all that before I arrived, judge me on what I do. Okay, fair enough. Now he's the environment minister, very credible, very experienced, helped Trudeau be able to go to Glasgow and do it with a straight face and talk environment. But if they approve Bédunard, then it's going to be on the watch of Stephen Guilbeault, and there's no way he's ever going to be able to justify, rationalize, or explain it away.
All right, just real quick, Natasha.
Before we let you go, can I get a quick comment from you, Tom, on the $600,000 the feds thought would be a good idea to spend to hire influencers to get the message across about COVID-19? Is that a good use of $600,000?
Probably, because you've got to try different techniques. You've got to talk to different people. I mean, define influencer. If you're talking senior sports or entertainment figures who are really strong, then you can pay them money to do an ad. That's what happens. And maybe people who like their sport, who like that type of the entertainment industry will go along with it. Look, we were pulling out all the stops. We were up against a small proportion of the population that had bought into conspiracy theories, who had read one article online, who had decided that vaccination was not the way to go, even though we knew that every scientist in the world said, yeah, go get vaccinated. But you were up against that. So anytime you could chip away at that resistance, it was worth doing. I know that anytime the government spends money, we all harken back to horror stories like the sponsorship scandal and things like that. But $600,000 is chump change compared to the federal budget. And if it worked to get a few thousand people to go and get their vaccination, so be it.
There you go.
I'm just waiting to find out how much the provincial government spent to make this look like a pittance compared to them.
Oh, well, by the way, I mean, this is one of the biggest things that never gets talked about with the Legault government. The CAQ has spent over $50 million in pure government PR. They'll say that this is all public interest advertising, but basically it's advertising for the government, because you get a full-page ad that says votre gouvernement, your government, and they list all the good things about themselves. So they've gone way beyond anything that any other government has ever done in the history of Quebec.
And then there's the polls to add on top of that.
Oh, of course. Yeah. And that's deep inside information. It's not just the polling numbers that eventually get put up. It's all the information that goes into making the polls, all the context, all the sub-information that allows you to fine-tune. This is what you call a focus group. You take a small number of people, it gives you a pretty good idea. But you can imagine with all of that information, they've got the inside track. And that's why, by the way, you'll see them sometimes say one thing and almost it's opposite, like 2 or 3 weeks later. It's because the polling has changed and they've just changed their tune.
Tom Mulcair, back tomorrow morning with Andrew Carter at 7:40. Thank you, Tom.
Talk to you tomorrow.
All right.